Good morning and welcome to today's edition of Percolating Collaboration. I'm here today with Brad Sara, Principal and Digital Lead for Warren and Mahoney Architects in New Zealand. Brad, you and I have worked together for quite some time over the years, various parts of the world and various businesses. I'm keen to have you describe your background to our audience and what inspired you to get into architecture and digital.
Well, as you know, my dad, like your father, was a contractor, and that got me interested in building. So from a young age, early teenager, I was out on the building sites, seeing the reality of building, the difficult positions builders and trades get put in, what it takes to fix those. From there, I had an interest in, in art and in drawing. And so those two interests kind of merged together into architecture. So I went through architecture school and studied a joint degree in architecture and building science. So building science is literally the science of buildings, how they heat, how they cool, moving into passive heating, passive cooling, wind flow, lighting, all of that. So quite a technically focused architecture start. And that's shortly after education was where I, of course, first met you, Jason, and started work on very large, complex projects. So corrections facilities and hospitals. So cutting my teeth on complexity and understanding the difficulties that design teams have in delivering those and the inefficiencies across design and construction, which of course turn towards technology and the ability to, I won't say fix, because I don't think we fixed it yet, but to start to mend and bridge those gaps of inefficiency.
It's a very varied career, and I guess the building science background is paying big dividends with the world of sustainability today. And how is sustainability having an influence on the use of digital at Warren and Mahoney?
So it has an influence in doing sustainability correctly. So there's a lot of greenwash out there, and there's a lot of people putting in methodologies that aren't backed by data. And you need a large amount of data to make great decisions fast. Our clients need to move fast. Our builders and our own teams need to move fast. Just having data on one project, on the project you're working on, is good. But being able to draw on a catalogue of data, we have some 2,500 digitally based projects. So in 3D, most of those are now at some point in time have been in Revizto. And so they are structured well, and we're able to start using machine learning and AI to draw on understanding the decisions we've made in the past with sustainability and carbon in mind, and how to be better informed in those decisions when we go to our clients.
Fantastic. So tell us more about your role and background at Warren and Mahoney. Why Warren and Mahoney? Obviously, ex-Warren and Mahoney, so I'm very familiar, but our audience won't be familiar. And I'm keen for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so Warren and Mahoney has always been well established in New Zealand, but in particularly in Christchurch. So I'm Christchurch born and bred, left to go to Victoria University in Wellington. But like most people, you always come home to, or your heart is at your home. And my family was here, and so coming back to Christchurch, Warren and Mahoney was the ultimate architecture firm to come back to. On top of that, when I came back was the start of the rebuild. So some 12, 13 years ago, we had a large earthquake in Christchurch, which frankly decimated the city. A huge amount of demolition, both underground but also on top. And Warren and Mahoney was at the forefront of that build. So we're part of the 100-day plan, and the opportunities that brought about required a huge amount of growth within Warren and Mahoney. So that's not necessarily just a growth in people, but a growth in the amount of work that was taken on. Warren and Mahoney at that time were using a software that I guess wouldn't take them through that journey, wasn't ready for that huge amount of growth. And so we had a whole digital transformation that, of course, you were part of as well, Jason. And that digital transformation took, well, it's still going now. We're constantly transforming. Revizto are constantly releasing better updates and improved ways of operating inside Revizto. And so that always brings innovation and new ways of working. But Warren and Mahoney leant into that change and have benefited from that change. They were, for me, the right firm at the right time in the right place.
Fantastic. And obviously, and I'm very familiar with the type and scale of some of these projects. How was Revizto instrumental as a tool to get the rebuild underway for Warren and Mahoney? Like, what kind of new doors did it open for Warren and Mahoney?
Yeah, so a lot of the work in the rebuild was driven from a government level, and the primary function of government is to consider risk, whether that's in construction or just in everyday life. In considering risk, they looked at the capabilities that we had in New Zealand, but particularly in Christchurch, and said the risk is too high. There's not enough, in their belief, there wasn't enough experience and not enough size and teams to deliver the upwards of $40 billion worth of work for a city of 350,000. Those numbers are huge per capita. And so we needed to draw on collaboration. So we partnered with many other architects from around the world. And so, of course, we need cloud-based digital collaboration. Now you have Revit, you have ArchiCAD, you have all of these things that can be cloud-based and can collaborate, but they come with a much higher risk, and they come with a greater entry point. And for us at the start of Revizto, it offered a tool that we could navigate around inside models, and people weren't scared of it. You could, unless you had admin rights, you couldn't break it. And so we could get, I guess it's a bit rude to say, but older stuff that weren't so digitally enabled into a platform and start engaging with the models that we were developing. We could get clients and project managers in there. And the big wins we had was where those project managers and those clients took our models into the meetings that were too high level for the design team to be in, and help use the model to drive decisions at that high level. That was the biggest win, because that showed we were getting the belief and the trust of clients and project managers in the platforms we were putting in place. That has grown. So that's grown within Warren and Mahoney. So that collaboration has come internally and externally, and so we now have consultants asking us to bring Revizto, and we have our project team saying, "Can I have Revizto on there?"
That's quite a transformation that you're talking about. That's not just transforming Warren and Mahoney, but it's transforming a community or an industry. What do you think was the catalyst for some of that transformation? Was it the people? Was it the technology? Or was it the way technology brought people together?
I think it was the last one. It was the ability of a technology to bring people together. But of course, you need people driving that. You need a team with a company behind it that is willing to pick up something that was new and trust in the people that made the decisions and tested it to say this is the right product, and then roll with it.
Yes.
There's very few places where you can build that trust so quickly, and very few products that are worthy of that trust.
Yes. I'm keen to understand, what are Warren and Mahoney saying about digital and innovation and collaboration after such a groundswell, such a moment in time where everything was changed overnight. So looking ahead with the emergence of AI and other technologies that are set to be just as disruptive as an earthquake, what is Warren and Mahoney thinking and looking into the future about?
First of all, we're looking with excitement. And we are looking further. There's always a conversation of, are you better to be in front of the wave, on the wave, the top of the wave, or slightly behind the wave? I'm a firm believer that with correct decision making, which doesn't all sit with one person, you are better to be at the front of the wave, work that efficiently, and feed back to the rest of the team sitting safely behind the wave the really good stuff. And with the rate that things are developing, and AI, but also just Revizto, the updates that you're able to pump out with, thankfully not monthly now, but with each of your new generations of Revizto, we need to stay at the forefront of them, because they are all useful additions. And if we're not using them, then we're not being as efficient as we can. And efficiency does take an investment. But we are of a scale at Warren and Mahoney where we're 350 people. And so the wins that we get from a small investment in understanding a new piece of software or a new development in software can be huge. So we are leaning heavily into AI, and I guess what Revizto has done prior to the recent release has become our norm for our complicated and large projects. So clash detection and automation through clash detection, assigning of issues, driving the team for greater collaboration, that's our norm. What we've done in the last 10 years of doing that is form a huge database. And that's not just a database of models and the content that's in the models, but of the decisions people have made to draw conclusions on an issue. So what we're focusing on now is trying to take that database and in anger use AI on it.
Fantastic. So it sounds like that there's a real depth and bench seat, is, thinking of a rugby analogy being in New Zealand, to the ROI that you're getting on your innovation and technology stack. I'm keen to understand how Revizto is influencing that ROI and what kind of things in that space are really propelling your teams forward. You mentioned a lot that you're able to scale innovation and efficiency because of Warren and Mahoney's size of its team these days. How has that scaling actually impacted the way that you might do things?
Yeah, I think that scaling is evident on a number of levels. And so firstly, it would be with the team that we call our advanced BIM team. So they are our active project BIM managers, paid work, implementing Revizto on projects, setting it up, training the people that haven't used it before, and then in the background as an interest, pushing the boundaries of what Revizto can do and feeding back to your team, I'm sure sometimes annoyingly, all the requests that we want in Revizto to do things a little bit better. They are the driving force behind Warren and Mahoney's use of Revizto. And in doing that, it's a relatively small team. So we're talking about 6 to 8 full-time people across 20 to 30 projects, but with a huge amount of automation that's been built to support them. So we have, I believe it's 6 automation machines now that are almost jam-packed 24 hours a day. So we are most likely going to have to build more infrastructure around that automation. And we're talking simple things, but we're also talking complex things. So the creations of views on sheets, the nightly uploading of updated models to Revizto, so we've got real-time information in there. In some instances, the nightly running of clash detection so that we can really represent the work that the team is doing in a day. And we're able to do that on billion-dollar complex projects. So that brings an ROI, not just to us, but to the consultants that work with us. Because in the olden days, and I'm talking 10 years ago, so it's not really the olden days, clash detection and BIM management was quite negative. It was, here's a bunch of stuff you haven't done, go and do it. And then the next week, here's the stuff you didn't do that I told you to do last time, plus a bunch more, go and do it. And it took a lot of effort to show the work that was done. But there's been a big focus and a big realization by us and our consultants that a large ROI of the investment in Revizto and digital platforms is to show to clients the work that is being done, to show the complexity of the decisions we make every day and the complexity of these buildings. Particularly in New Zealand and Australia, it's not like the US market part of the US market, where you will get repetition of design over and over. Nearly every one of our projects is bespoke. And I'm not just talking about Warren and Mahoney, I'm talking about the industry. Yes, you have multi-residential and you might do 200, 300 apartments that are similar, but the next multi-residential project you move on to, even with the same developer, will need to be slightly different because of building consent or resourcing consent or product availability at that time. And so we need to approach each project with a fresh point of view. It always has fresh problems, and we need to reduce the risk by using tools like Revizto. From an overall Warren and Mahoney point of view, our greatest ROI with Revizto comes from reducing our risk. The greatest risk as an architect, other than a poor design, which is just not a thing with us, is bad documents, because those bad documents will affect you for 2, 3, 5 years in construction. They will set up an unfortunate relationship with contractor and trades. and you'll end up in all sorts of conversations you shouldn't need. So if we can coordinate and collaborate and communicate better the work that we are doing, the work that our consultants are doing, it ends up in a better set of 2D documents, which more often than not are still our deliverable, but a model that supports those documents correctly.
Thinking about some of that, and to quote you about the older generation or the more experienced people out there in this world, this transformation must seem almost like a Star Trek moment where you're walking into the holodeck virtually via your iPad, iPhone, etc. How is that traditional documentation layer that you speak of being transformed with new technologies like Revizto on the construction site, and what does it mean for that experienced generation?
Yeah, so ultimately we are seeing a greater reliance put on the models, but I think our powers that be, mainly government level, are a long way away from changing the standard form of contracts to make the models a deliverable. And so we're going to have probably at least another decade, maybe 2 decades, where the drawings are the number one document. And we now see them superseding specifications. But you can gain a huge amount of confidence if your model is developed to a level that supports those documents correctly. And what I mean by that is things like reducing the amount of what we would standard call typical details, or increasing the level of development of certain elements that we know we always have problems with. And we don't do that lightly because we know it affects us. It needs to be a conversation with the client and the project managers because it will affect scope. It will affect the effort that's required from a design team. But with a tool like Revizto, we can show that. So we can take a 2D document that would be a standard deliverable early on in a project, and we can overlay it with the model. And we can make sure that that sheet is constantly updated in that modeled environment. And we can sit with the client and the project manager and cut the sections that we need in that model very simply with the sheet overlaid to show that the typical detail isn't really typical. Yes. And there are multiple iterations of that detail. And if we don't, and then go through the journey of what happens when the contractor and the trade comes on, if we don't resolve that, there's 1 RFI, there's 2 RFIs, there's 3 RFIs. And then we think about all of the admin that goes into an RFI, and no one wins in an RFI. I know people talk about contractors and trades getting margins, and there's maybe variations for design consultants, but nobody wins at the end of the day because no one allowed for that piece of work.
Yeah.
So the more, what am I trying to say? The more refinement in models, the more refinement in the design, the more future thinking we can have in them, the better place everyone will be. And yes, that does lean towards design and build. I think in New Zealand, we've tried ECI in a number of different ways, and it's very hard to make it work for everybody. Design and build, when considered correctly and when scoped correctly with the right tools like Revizto, it works. And I know this is a bit of a segue to a question I know you're going to ask me a bit later on, but I know in the US market from the Rev Up conference that there's a huge push to design and build. So I was very surprised to hear that only 1% of projects across the United States are design and build, but they have a large push at federal level to drive that. And design and build needs digital tools because it's hard enough to get consultants to talk and collaborate, but to get that combative relationship that's just always been there, largely because of contracts and largely because of misunderstanding of each other's scopes. And the designers always cause me problems. Contractors, why can't you just build it? Everyone comes into a project with that kind of attitude. You need these tools to break down that relationship and to go, actually, we're both talking about the same thing here. We just talk about it slightly differently as a designer to you do with your hammer and nails.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into that question. And I know that you've been to a couple of international conferences recently, Autodesk University and our own Rev Up earlier this year. And thank you for being a participant and a panelist at Rev Up. I particularly enjoyed the panel. The conversation between owners, contractors, designers just needs to be had more and more often. So I'm keen to understand a bit more of the observations that you had from those events, particularly around market sectors that you observed, and how technology, while being global and being a tool that is often, the same feature set globally, how is it influencing the way these nuances of regional and national differences in the industry are applied? You spoke often of how New Zealand is quite bespoke. I guess a lot of that has to do with its earthquake seismic resilience. How does that influence other regions?
Yeah, that was a long question, so I might have to come back to you to repeat parts of it. But I think I'd start with saying while the RevUp conference for us was a long way away, so it was a lot of travel, it was definitely worth it. I enjoyed the slightly more intimate nature of RevUp than some of the large international conferences, because you can have more time having the more meaningful conversations because there is more time for it. And a lot of those meaningful conversations emphasized or really locked in what I kind of believe at the back of my head, but I wasn't quite sure about. Because we immediately sitting down in little old New Zealand at the bottom of the world away from everyone, everyone must be doing stuff better than us. But we go over there and we start to talk to people and they're facing the same problems we are in big old America. With all of its might and power, they've got the same problems. And it really comes down to people misunderstanding everybody else. And so how do you fix that? Greater communication, greater collaboration, greater sharing. There are very few tools that allow you to do all of that at the frequency that Revizto allows you to do it, at the ease that Revizto allows you to do it. So that, even if we were collaborating across the distance between New Zealand and the US, it can be almost real time.
Yeah.
And it was, I think the big eye opener was the conversations we had with contractors over there. Same conversations we're having with contractors here. Slightly more frustration in the US around the way the architectural communities responded to coordination. So in New Zealand, architects contractually need to drive and hold a whole lot of responsibility around coordination. And it's definitely something that I'm looking to explore more in the US. So there's a lot of intricacies with contracts and liabilities and different law. So I'm not at all saying it's an easy fix.
Yes.
But there's probably some middle ground there, and risk is reduced with tools like Revizto because you get into a more, I guess the easiest way to say it is a friendly environment rather than a litigious environment. When you can see that Jason's moved this part of the wall, and oh look, he put a note in there to say why he moved that, so that I understand it and don't just go, Jason's an idiot, he moved that wall and now I have to redesign everything.
Yeah.
You can see the story of why you had to move it. And then when, I don't know, Frank comes in a year's time, that information is still in there, and a whole history of what I had to do to respond to your wall movement is in there too. And all of a sudden that trust is built up and that conflict comes down because we can see that history in the data.
Fantastic. And so thinking about some of that history, and I know that we've just released version 5.14 of Revizto, which comes with a new augmented reality or AR mode. What kind of experimentation or uses do you foresee with tools like AR in the construction sector?
So there's the things that I can see, but then there's the 20 to 30 emails I've got in my inbox from the 350 odd people we have that have seen, oh, AR's out on Revizto, I want to use it. How do I use it? Tell me I can use it. So that is both awesome and petrifying, because part of my role is to make sure that people are leaning into new technology, using it for the right reasons, in the right applications, and understand limitations of it. But we had it out on the archive site the other day, which you know well, in Wellington. It's a very large, complex building with massive seismic requirements that is going to house New Zealand's treasures for a very large lifespan. Not our usual 50 years, but double that, allowing for massive seismic movements. The ability to take the model onto site in the 10 minutes that we were there to do a demonstration had so many oohs and ahs from the contractors and the trades that gathered around as we did it, just in understanding that stuff was in the right location. And we're able to move around inside the space quite safely and go, oh, look, that's moved, and have the contractor next to us and say, yes, but this is why it's moved. These were the reasons that it had to be done. And so in time, those reasons won't be left in someone's mind or on a piece of paper for an RFI. They will be in the Revizto environment. And so that level of collaboration and communication that we have through design, and at the moment, I would say through the shop drawing phase, will just continue through the built phase. And then the world is your oyster for operations.
And you can imagine, people who are maintaining the building having that ability to have X-ray vision. It must be something else.
Yeah, well, we know of projects that have had massive leaks in high pressure water pipes that have unloaded 200,000 litres plus of water into a building 8 floors up, and people unsure or having to run back to a facilities management office to sort through A1 drawings to find where the valve is, or to find which part of a fixed ceiling, because there was no manhole designed at the valve. They need to smash through with a hammer to get to that valve. And by the time you've done that, the repercussions of that amount of water through a building are just horrendous.
Yeah.
So if you have all of your operations side out on site with a phone and the capability to pull that model up in seconds and locate, even if it's not millimeter accurate, but locate within a meter, 500 mils, 250 mils of where that valve is, we're hoping that there's a manhole there because we've had a good design and construction phase. But if there's not, you're going to know where it is.
Yeah.
What I hope we never get to, but I would also like to experiment in, is the disaster recovery. So after a significant seismic event, we know that everything's going to need to be looked at. All seismic braces are going to need to be checked. And over the last 12 years, I don't know how many, but there must be millions of seismic braces that have been put in place on our projects. Now, we're not necessarily responsible for going and doing that post-disaster review, but someone is. And if you can digitize it, you will get a better understanding of how that building performed. You will ensure that you have checked everything, not just the 20% that you could get to easily. Or you will know which things you haven't got to, and you can find alternate ways of, I guess, signing off on that.
Yeah, and I didn't think of the whole disaster recovery aspect. We talked about how we're both familiar with the Christchurch recovery and the earthquake side of things, and the lack of information that was available to access sites that had been essentially demolished by an act of God. Thinking about AR, thinking about the tools that are available now and how that might have changed that world, is not that it's a positive thing should there be another earthquake in New Zealand, but the technology should enable a better response. In thinking about that, what kind of future thoughts that you're having around, let's say, point cloud technology or photogrammetry, or even robotics and AI? I know that you're very familiar with Spot the Dog, the Boston Dynamics robotic dog. Keen to hear how you see things unfolding in that space.
Yeah, so I firmly believe, I firmly believe that every project should be point cloud scanned at completion, or if you haven't, before you launch into a piece of work. And that doesn't mean that you need to spend, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 scanning everything. If you own a large facility, at points in time, you will be pulling down ceilings or opening up walls. And so you can gradually build up your point cloud scan of that facility or of your entire campus as you go through these pieces of work. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we know that as builts historically, before we had tools like Revizto and QPix and other tools to help verify as builts were inaccurate. Walls were in the wrong place, doors had moved. More importantly, equipment in ceiling spaces had moved. It is important to know where this stuff is. It might not be now, but at some point in the future it will be. Particularly when we start to look at what will happen with life cycle carbon assessments and the need to factor in demolition and to label elements within your building for demolition for reuse, for recycle, and ensure that that is documented in a way that someone in 50 years, or in the case of a project like Archives, in 100 years, can come up and understand it and go, actually, our ability to recycle materials has increased. And so we can update this model and relook at it. But we've got a solid base of what the architect and the contractor's thoughts were, and the services engineers and the structural engineers' thoughts were in 2024. The point cloud scan will help you know what the building was, and hopefully someone has gradually built up on that as alterations have been made. And if we think about natural disasters where things move, earthquakes, volcanoes, you need to, which are earthquakes, I get that. We need to understand how a building has moved, and we need to then be able to load that into structural modeling and understand, is this structure reusable? Or can we just demolish part of the structure? Or what does our insurance claim look like, and how are we evidencing that?
Yeah.
And then we can go to the heritage level and understand what happens after a massive event like the Christchurch earthquakes. So if we go back to when those events occurred, decimated the city, closed the city off, under military control, no one can go in there. Government has 350,000 people saying, I want to get back to normal life as quickly as possible because that gives me safety and security. I need an income. We need to rebuild the city as quickly as possible. What do? We make decisions to demolish really quickly because it's easiest to start from the ground up. And so we lost a lot of heritage. When we looked at something like the Christchurch Cathedral that was severely damaged, but decided to rebuild or reinstate, we had very little information to start that project from. We had a few point cloud scans that people had done as kind of side projects to prove the technology, but they didn't capture everything. We had to piece that building together from Google Images, from archive material, from original plans, and they were water damaged and fire damaged and everything else. And so there were significant parts of that building that we couldn't get into that we just didn't understand. And it was the same for multiple projects around Christchurch. But if we had had a robust point cloud scan, ideally a model built off that point cloud scan, then in reality, we would have saved a lot of money. And so we look at large asset holders of heritage information, and the conversation I have is you need a budget for this. And once you've done that, all these other avenues of putting your spaces that can only be visited in person, online, being able to be visited from around the world, all of these opportunities open up once something is digitized. And models can be beautiful. So I know with a lot of heritage projects, there's beauty in the drawings. And certainly at Warren and Mahoney, we put a lot of time into the way that our drawings look and feel. You'll know that from your time here, the way that shadows are represented, the line weights. But you can put that effort into a model, and you can capture the architectural features, the heritage architectural features that make that building beautiful. And you can render it out if you need. There's multiple real-time rendering engines out there that can be used to make it look as beautiful as it is in person.
So one final thought before we wrap up with such an interesting conversation today. You've had a long time in the industry. You've seen a big transformation. You've had an amazing experience with Warren and Mahoney through the rebuilding of Christchurch and the devastation and rebirth of Christchurch. And thinking about projects like the Archives project, and my mind goes to what is 100 years like in the future? What does your mind do when you think about this building's going to be around long after we're both gone?
It stops about 10 years out of my mind. It's almost impossible with the speed that things are developing to really understand what's there. And so all we can do is use all of the brain power and all of the technology power we have to prepare the best for whatever is to come. I am a strong believer that we won't all be replaced. We will be used in different ways. And humans, I believe, will always understand humans better and communicate to each other better than any AI we ever built. I know there'll be thousands of people out there that will argue and show me examples of AI responding to the facial expressions that I'm making. And for all I know, you could be AI right now.
Some people think I am.
But Yeah, 100 years is a long way. One of the big conversations I've had often with heritage specialists is, what does heritage look like in 50 years, 100 years? Because heritage buildings to us now are bricks and mortar or stone and mortar. But what does a World Architecture Award winning building that uses aluminium curtain wall and glass and steel and concrete look like as a heritage building in 50 years? When transom and mullions start to explode because they've reached end of life. And that facade can no longer withstand the maximum wind event or the maximum earthquake loading. Do we have nanobots that we just release onto the site and can fix that aluminium? Or do we need to encase it in a new facade and that becomes a heritage element? Or are we so advanced in our digital journey and the ability to look at things on screens or in holograms or wherever we are at that point in time that capturing heritage digitally is enough, and we're in a comfortable place, which I'm not saying is necessarily a good place to be, but in a comfortable place to let the physical go and build the new, more carbon sensible offering on that side, which might be to not build at all and just replace it with 30 stories of garden. But what I do hope for in 100 years is that we are all understanding each other and communicating and collaborating more than we are today. Because if we go the other way, we're all stuffed. And the robots will take over.
That final closing statement resonates very strongly, and it makes me think of Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear on that bombshell. Thank you, Brad. What a fascinating conversation, and what an amazing journey that you've had. And thank you for sharing that with us today on Percolating Collaboration. And I hope to have you back at some point in the future and to discuss how some of our future innovations are further influencing the work that you do at Warren and Mahoney.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great. And if there's anything we've talked about today that people want to hear more about, I'm more than happy to come back and talk to an hour on whatever that point is.
Fantastic. We'll take you up
Great.
on that.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Revizto.
Thank you.